Today we're going to be painting a primrose. We're going to do an impressionistic painting of these primroses. We're not going to try and paint them exactly. We're not going to try and do a photorealistic picture. We're just going to create an atmosphere and then we're going to put in some detail. So we're channeling Primrose to do that. What we're looking at, what I'm going to be looking at, is the quality of these petals. So make a quick visually memorize what shape these petals are and translate that to your pencil in a second. Compare that with the leaves, not necessarily the shape of the leaves, but the texture of the leaves. Look at that crinkly surface they've got on there. We're going to be trying to achieve that. Now this is a photograph I took in a rather scruffy corner of my garden. So, you know, there's bits of plank and bits of grass and bits of stone and pebble and also it goes off rather awkwardly off the top of the picture there. So we're going to abandon trying to do an accurate representation of this. We're just going to capture the essence and we're going to use a little artistic license to maybe lose this scrappy top up here and just focus on a nice composition in the center of the picture. And I did notice that, can you see the way this array of flowers swoops round in a kind of S shape like that? I thought that was rather nice. So we'll try and encompass that as well. So with no further ado, let me do that. Let's have a go at trying to capture the essence of a primrose. So grab a pencil and we'll start off. Now look, that's that kind of swoopy rhythmic flow of flowers is quite nice there. So memorize that and let's try and get that happening somewhere in here. But I'm not going to draw that line in. I'm just going to remember it and I'm going to create. I'll tell you what, to simplify it, let's treat each one of these flower heads as a circle. So let's just start off by putting in a few circles where we want our flowers to be, like so. So it's nice that the main body's there, which is there, and it kind of comes down here. There's little ones over there, and then it swoops. Some of these circles are flattened into ellipses, which means that they'll look as though they're pointing off in different directions. So they're not all perfect circles. This is quite a nice little curved ball down the bottom there. And then it kind of swoops up here. Don't want to overcomplicate it, but I've just got that kind of swoopy thing going around there like that. Maybe a little fella like that. So now I've got my composition penciled in. Let's have a look at the nature of these petal shapes. And again, we're not going to fastidiously copy them exactly. We're just going to suggest them. This guy here, he's kind of a focal point. It's the biggest flower, which I've got here. So let's just he's the kind of centerpiece. So I'm just going to do that really loosely like that. It's just a series of curves, kind of random, not bothering with the interiors because there isn't really any linear work going on in there. They're just gentle gradients of color. So let's just quickly, those few circles we've penciled in, let's just firm those up into shapes. See, that one's going behind there, like so. It's always nice to have a little bit of overlap. That creates the sensation, the illusion of depth. We like that. There's not much left of this thing down here that's being mullered by the slugs and snails, but we'll pretend that it's still rather a lovely little flower down there. So I'm now just using those circles that I've scribbled down, and I'll just turn them into like little fluffy shapes. There's this thing down here. Try not to make them too uniform. That's about it. But maybe finish. Maybe bring one around here. I won't be too careful about going over my previous flowers, circles. So I've got a bit of a thing going like that. Nice little composition. Maybe a little hint of might throw one in there, just to make it agreeable. And then let's get in some loose suggestions of leaves as well. I'm already just a big fella down here. I mean, the leaves themselves, they've got a very typical, distinctive edge. Kind of, there's a bit of this going on. You know, they're quite random serrations. They're quite interesting, those edges. So I could settle down and do something quite distinctive there, but like I said, we just kind of suggest I want to keep this semi-abstract. I know abstracts that a lot of us find a little bit disconcerting, but so that's kind of enough for me. That's where I am with that very simple collection of shapes. Right, now this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting, because what I'm going to do now, I'm going to wet the whole surface with clean water like this. I know it's out there, it's out there, but I want to generate a damp surface to throw some color into, and because I want this to be an atmospheric, semi-abstract, impressionistic painting study. So I've wet the whole surface. Now, you don't want any puddles. You don't want it to be sitting in pools on the surface, because that's just going to make your paper wobbly. But this is going to be a nice surface to paint on. And what we're doing this, as I say, in 2 stages. We're going to do it wet in wet. And that first stage, that creates an atmosphere. That's going to create a nice atmospheric background to then add a little bit more detail. So that's kind of, can you see that? A bit shiny, but no puddles. And into this, I'm going to drop a random selection of appropriate colors. Now, obviously, these are a very pale lemon yellow, but by the way, because this paper's now wet, I'm not making a watery mixture here, because if I add a watery mixture to a wet surface, it's going to dilute the color even more, and I end up with very kind of washy colors, colored water. So I'm just going to go in here, and I'm going to quickly just put down with this lemon yellow a few areas of color like that. And hopefully if your paper's wet, it's going to be softening the edges. And into that, I'm going to hit it with a few little plops of green. That's probably quite too pale a green there. So I'm just also leaving lots of white, because there's a lot of white in here. And as I've often said, it's good to leave white in your watercolors. Always have bits of white here and there. I've got a few greens here, so I'm just putting in a few different spots of color here and there. And that is generating quite a subtle atmosphere of petals and leaves. Maybe a little bit more out in the peripheries here. And maybe going in with a few dabs. Maybe while I'm at it, let's put a bit of brown in there as well. Not brown, kind of earth colors. Now over here, look, see, I might be getting a bit dry towards the edges, and I don't want hard edges there. I just want it to bleed out into kind of nothingness. So if I am getting hard edges around the periphery, I'm just going to soften those off. Let's see where we go. That. Okay, and that's kind of it. I'm quite happy with that. Also, having done that, I don't want any puddles here either. You see, it's pooling there a little bit. So if it is, I'm going to dry that brush off and just hoover up any of that color there. Sorry, not color, puddles. I'm removing excess water. Here, you see around the edges, it's starting to pool and puddle. But that has created quite a nice atmosphere. It doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be precise. On the contrary, there are no hard edges. It's just suggesting the colors. Now what I'm doing, I'm just going to get, while this is still wet, I'm just going to pop in these little central yellowy bits, which are kind of orange. So I'm just going to take a little peck of that. I don't know what color this is. I don't know what it's called, but it's a kind of very deep, rich yellow. And I'm just going to pop in a few centers. Now, popping them into the centers of these flowers while it's still wet will mean that it will just ooze out. Just nice little suggestions of color like that. Yeah, see, really simple. Now at this stage, I want to dry this off a little bit. Obviously, I don't have the time to sit and watch it dry, so I'm giving it a blast with my I think this is a little chef's blowtorch for crisping up the creme brulees. But a hairdryer will do the trick. But what I want to do is I just want to dry it off, because the next lines and the next color that I want to put on, I want it to be hard edged. So that's not as dry as it could be, but it's certainly taken off the majority of the water. And now, because that is relatively dry, I can start to create hard edges. Give me a second, just give it a bit more. Yeah, I guess. Okay. So now I'm going to start to paint all this background. I'm going to consider those flowers done. I'm going to consider them, you know, they're practically white, aren't they? Let's face it, they're white with these lovely yellowy centers. But now, having done that, I'm going to come in here with some greens, and I'm going to define these flowers by painting around them. So let's get some green going. I'm also going to be putting in some earth colors. So I'm going to get that brown going there. And because there's a lot of yellow going on here, I'm also going to just wet these up a little. I'm also going to activate that, get some blue in there, some nice ultramarine blue. Okay, so I'm going to start putting some background in, but I'm also going to be controlling the edges as well. So watch this. I'm going to start to define the edge of these flowers because this is wet. Sorry, because this is now dry. I can go around my flowers and start to pick them out. I want to keep it interesting, so I don't want to just block that in with green. I want to come in, I'm going to put a bit of brown in there as well. And maybe even a bit of blue. I'm going to leave. Also, I want to modulate the density as well, and the value. I want to keep them a bit light, a bit darker, just keep it all nice and visually interesting. Now I am painting around where the flowers are not. This is negative painting, this is. Some kind of I just painted. I'm going to come back to the leaves in a minute. Now you see I've reached the end of this edge here. I don't want that to be hard, so I'm just washing my brush out and I'm painting outside here with clean water and then bringing it up to that edge. So I want this to just flow around and create an atmosphere. Where are we? Let's see. Let's get a bit of this going. So I'm round the proof is here. I'm out into the soil. Now you see here again, I'm dry, so I just want to, with clean water, soften that off. So that, look at that, just explodes out and creates a really nice effect. I'm not being too careful either because I want this to be quite a quick study. You know, it's nice to work quickly with watercolors. They really do appreciate being thrown around quickly. So I'm just going to scoot around the peripheries. Wherever there's a hard edge on these outskirts, I'm just softening it like that. But just defining the edges of those flowers like so. See, outside here, it's quite cool. So I'm going to come in here with some blue. It's really nice to mix colors on your paper like this. Again, these edges here are harsh, so I'm just going to soften that like that. Just defining. Really nice and scrappy here. I'm enjoying this. Let's have a look at some of these leaves now. That's got some background in there. Let's have a quick look. I'm just going to, as I say, keep saying, I don't like to see crispy edges like this, so I'm just softening all the way around here with clean water. Let's have a look at a leaf. So let's take this one. I'm just going to paint half of it with clean water. Just going to re-wet it again. You remember we said they're quite crinkly. Let's see if we can do that. See if we can make that. So I've damped that off. I've just done half because I want to try and leave a vein down the middle. So now I'm just going to get some green. I'm just going to dot it in like this. Because it's wet, those little dots are going to spread out. Let me show you. Can you see how those little dots are just starting to fizzle in the wet surface? Let's put some variety of green in there. I've got a few greens here. I'm just going to pop in a few more. And then maybe I've got quite a darker green. I'm just going to maybe put some darker green in there up against the flower petal. So look, that's given the impression of that leaf, hasn't it? That is similar to that. Let's do the other half of that leaf. Just going to pre-wet it. Not too much. I don't want puddles of water. And then let's go back in there and do that. That's a really nice way of introducing texture. Again, just put in a few varieties of green in there. Nice. do a bit more of that. Now you see here, look, there's a big old leaf coming out there, which I've kind of left there. There's a bit of a gap there in my painting. I'm going to see if I can always go back in with your pencil and just, you know, introduce little bits. It might be quite nice just to suggest some more leaves. I've been a little bit remiss with placing these leaves, so it might be nice just to go in and suggest a few more with the pencil like that. But I think this is really successful. I'm going to put in a few more leaf textures. So again, let me just repeat. He's already got a texture, so it's going to be interesting adding that texture to that and look at the difference between that texture and this. So this big fella down here, just going to pre-wet him. Oh, see, that's what happens when you touch a little bit of already wet stuff. It'll just ooze in. But like I say, this is a nice, quick study. We're not laboring this at all. We're diving in here. We're just capturing it. And what we're doing now is we're capturing this texture. And we're doing that by pre-wetting the surface and then just, that's too light. Just going in with a bit of green and creating that texture by dotting in colour onto a wet surface. So starting with one shade of green, and then let's go in with another shade of green like this. And it's lovely when you're working wet in wet because it creates all kinds of interesting patterns. This leaf here disappears into shadow underneath, so I'm going to go in quite heavily with this lovely dark green. If you've only got one green, you can modify the darkness of it by adding blues and even adding blacks if you want to, although that's not, I don't really recommend that. So I'm going to create a shadow here by putting a little bit more. I'm also going to come in with my sharpened end here. I'm going to put a few veins in here. That's something I like to do, but I haven't been doing. You see, while it's still wet, you carry on adding colour and it'll just carry on fizzling out into the wet surface. I'm going to spread that out a little bit there. And where it gets really dark in here, I'm going to try putting a bit of blue in, see what happens. Because these are, you know, these very, very shadowy depths here are quite cool. There's blue in there. And that's a good way to take the value down. Look there where I've scratched into that leaf. It's created a really nice effect. You know, it's just going in and here as well. I'm going to pre-wet this fella. And let's introduce a bit of texture into there. Maybe a bit too spotty, this guy, so I'm going to try and soften it off a bit. Just going in with a wet brush, just to get a little less spotty. It's quite interesting. I don't know, you can see where the sun's just catching it. I'm just exploring this with a little bit of cadmium yellow. See, that bit of cadmium yellow is quite nice. I might introduce a bit of that down here. And I'm now looking at these centers of these flowers. Now, I know there's a lot of white going on, but to me, these might be a little bit too white. So let's just cheer them up with a little bit of this yellow that I've just activated here. And just maybe just put in a few little blips and blobs. Don't want any hard edges, all needs to be nice and soft. So I'm going in with water again. Always plenty of water. Just to soften things up and make it interesting. Yeah, I think they needed a little bit of extra yellow in there. So now we've got a nice little scene going on in here, but I do want to define these edges a bit more. Oh, a bit behind, look, I haven't. You'll have to do these later. I've taken on too much here, I think, for a half-hour class. Let's just try and get a bit more leaf action going around here. So I still haven't defined the edge of these flowers here. So, as usual, I'm painting just up to the edges of the flowers. And then I'm just going to give it this kind of treatment. It's actually rather nice when you do it quickly. You see, this paint will only go to the areas that I've pre-wet and no further. And in some respect, you know, these leaves over here that I've rushed, in some respects, they're more successful than these leaves over here, where I was a little bit more careful with, which just goes to show, like I try to express, it's nice to be quick with these watercolors. They really appreciate spontaneity. So, I think it'd be rather nice to get a bit more definition around the peripheries. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to get some brown going, look, that lovely kind of rust color there. And I've got my blue standing by here, all nice and gloopy and active. So, for example, above here, it's all a bit vague going on here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to pre-wet the surface, but I'm not going right up to the edges that I want to define. I'm putting that there so that when the paint hits it, it'll just spread out and disappear. So if I want to define the edges that are around here like this, you see where it's dry, the edge stays sharp. But where the edge then hits the wet paper, it softens. which is what I want. No, it's just drifting off. And get in with some really nice strong colour as well. You know, we're building up a nice layer upon layer upon layer of colours, and they're just starting to create this lovely kaleidoscope of colours. Down here's a bit green, so I'm balancing this up. See here? Just making all these edges. So as soon as I put this colour in, it descends into shadow, which is what I'm after. Down in here, a few of that, bit of that, bit of that. Sharp edges, I don't want those, because you know they kind of attract your attention. And I don't want my eye to be drawn to the edges. I want the eye to stay in the center. A few little hits of color. Yeah, there's still little areas that I could work on. There's a leaf here that I haven't addressed. See, that leaf hasn't defined the edge of that flower very clearly, has it? So, dropping it in quickly like this. These leaves, to me, are more successful than these labored leaves here. I like these quick, spontaneous marks and gestures. So, you know, just a few little bits like that. It suggests the texture of the leaf, but doesn't look too uniform. I think some of these might be a bit uniform. But you know, it's a sketch. You know, this is where it's all right to make mistakes and get things wrong. That's how you learn. One little final touch, I think, right in the center of these flowers, there's a little pep of green. I'm just going to come in here. Because at the moment, you know, these look a little bit unfocused, I think, just to finish it off. I don't want to be too strong. So. It's feeling a bit too strong, just dab it off. I've had my nose right up to this for the last half an hour, and I'm just looking back. This is a bit red over here. Might just try and cool that down a bit. I can neutralize red with green. We know that, don't we? So I've just got this washy old stuff over at the top here. I'm just going to drop that in just to take the heat out of there. To me, it's just a little bit too hot. I can carry on defining the edges of the plant just by negative painting around there. Look, as soon as I did that, a leaf appears there, just because I put a darker edge around it. So it's really quite chaotic, this, but it's rather impressionistic. I quite like it. and it's dry over here. Look, I can put in another, I can create leaves wherever I like just by doing that. Just by going around that edge, I've created a leaf there that wasn't there before. Just by painting negatively around that shape. Do you know what? I could fiddle with this for hours, but I'm going to call it a day. He says, fiddling. Maybe a little hit of yellow here and there. I tell you what, these lessons have turned into little half-hour sketches into 3/4 of an hour sessions, but it's nice. Sometimes you get carried away. Bit of scratch work. That's interesting. Look, if I scratch into a wet surface, the paint dribbles into the channel that I've scratched and turns it dark. Which is rather nice. A few more texture dots in there because that is leaf. Yeah, does that say Primrose? I think it does. Now, that's interesting. I was just kind of fiddling, as is my wont, and I suddenly realized I was making random marks there. Bad practice. Somebody's just asked me, what am I using to scratch? I've sharpened the end of my stick with a knife, but you can use anything you can find lying around. You can use a pencil, but of course that will leave a trace of graphite. You can use the edge of a credit card, cocktail stick, a ballpoint pen that's stopped working, anything you like, really. Use your imagination. Right, I'm fiddling now. I'm going to stop. Let me get back to you. Let's have a little close-up look before we go. Let's see. It's kind of chaotic, but it's quite nice. It's a good little experiment. I'll tell you what I would do. I'm tempted here. That flower's disappearing into that flower. So just standing back and having a look at it, I might be tempted to just try and define that edge there with a bit of yellow, or maybe even a bit of green. Just something that'll take, something that'll just differentiate the two. So you see, coming around there like that, I'll probably do a little bit stronger. Just making that a bit darker than that suddenly brings that flower forward, doesn't it? I could probably go around and do that in other places here as well. See those two flowers? That flower's overlapping that flower. We only know that because that line disappears behind it. But if we wanted to accentuate that, we just take a bit of value. These are random colors. I've mixed a bit of brown with a bit of yellow, but I'm just doing that to show you that if I outline that and then just soften that edge, can you see how this flower now disappears behind this one? It's suddenly sitting behind it. I can do it here as well. I'll do it with a bit of green here. Let's just put a bit of tone there. And then suddenly that flower disappears behind this front one here. And maybe here too. You know, this fella's sitting behind this fella, but probably brown's not the right colour to use. Maybe a little bit of green or yellow. Well, that just adds a bit of depth. Anyway, waffling now. Do that. There we are. Whew. Right, everybody. Thank you for being here. I hope you all enjoyed that.
Martin, thank you as always.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. I was just about to say, I know you probably didn't have the hairdryer on hand to dry it off, but if you do have a hairdryer, it just scoots the thing along a bit, because hopefully now you'll see the difference between painting on a wet surface and painting on a dry surface. Wet surface for atmosphere, dry surface for detail. And on that note, I'll say goodbye and I'll see you all next week.
It was wonderful.
Thanks,
Thank you.
You
Bye,
really
everybody.
enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Sal.
See you next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.